I'm Eric Barnes with the Daily Memphian. Welcome to the Sidebar, a weekly show on the community, arts, culture, and more. Today we're continuing to mark the upcoming 5th anniversary of the Daily Memphian. Today with board chair, my friend, one of the co-founders of the place, Andy Cates. So stay with us for a conversation with Andy. How you doing?
I'm great. Am I on now? Is this official?
It's official.
Okay, good.
It's funny we're doing this because we just spent how we normally spend time, which is an hour on a Zoom call. But now you're here in person in the world headquarters. Yeah. So it's very disorienting for me.
Galactic headquarters.
Galactic headquarters. So, 5 years.
There's no way it's been 5 years.
That was going to be one of my questions. How long does it feel?
Not like 5 years.
Yeah.
Truly. Insanely. Natalie's making a...
Are you saying 2 years? 3 years. Natalie's saying it feels like
Natalie says like 3. If she says 3, I'll go with 3. Yeah. I'd say 2 years and 11 months.
Yeah.
And 2 weeks. Like, I don't know.
How much is that COVID too?
Yeah.
Because time is so weird because of COVID.
That froze.
Yeah.
Although you say it, I think COVID brought the best out in Daily Memphian. I'm not saying, which is the team, not, I don't get credit for that. But between critical COVID coverage and then a reminder of Jennifer's incredibly powerful memorial, which Natalie spoke at, in the work she did in the restaurant, which that was a crisis. I thought that was it immediately brought up while we're here.
Yeah.
But yes, that was, and so what do you define as COVID? 2 years, year and a half?
I mean, yeah, but really 2 years. I mean, I think for us at the paper, it was like a year and a half that was really intense. And then just, everyone's lives, I think about, separate from that, you think about kids, and your kids graduated, and mine, one graduated early and one was in college and working from the couch at home. And, so some of that stuff too. So all the whole time warp of it, but separate from COVID, I mean, it is weird. Sometimes I feel like it's been 5 years. Sometimes I feel like it's been 2 years. Sometimes I feel like it's been 10 years. Yeah. And one of the things, and I think it's a huge compliment to and this is, we'll get to the stuff we've screwed up, but it is a huge compliment to the staff that when I tell people, we're coming up on 5 years, or a year ago when I said we're coming up on 4 years, they'll go, oh, it seems so much longer than that. It seems like you've been around forever.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge compliment.
Yeah.
And it's not just that we hired Jeff and now the late Jennifer Biggs and Chris Harrington, people that people knew, but it's just that I think we hit something with news consumers that makes it feel like we've been here doing this for a long time.
Yep.
Which is a huge compliment. When do you remember? So we did a podcast at the 1 year anniversary and tried to remember how, like at that time it was a little fresher.
Yeah.
we were younger.
I didn't listen to that before this interview.
I know. Well,
big mistake.
Yeah. Intentionally.
Lack of prep.
I did not. And so how do you remember this all coming about?
I still think of it as a decade because, including conversations you and I had over years, trying to go get the CA, and that was over a decade. That was, I guess, a decade ago. And I got to go look at my own timelines. Having these ongoing conversations.
By get the CA, you mean
try to buy the CA, which thank God did not happen. It would have been a bad answer, and I think we had assumed we would be able to fix a lot of structural things that we would not have been able to fix.
Yeah, and that was from Scripps. That's when Scripps.
From Scripps, not Gannett. Before Gannett bought it. What year did Gannett? What was that?
Well, it was a two-step thing where Scripps spun out its papers and they merged with.
But what was the year
Gannett
officially announced? I
think then it was like 6. It's in that 16? Timeline we use all the time. But yeah, it was around 16.
So I look at and then before that, I don't know. So on this specific is having coffee and saying you had already started Daily News, had already been, I guess, for 3 years doing more of a heavy editorial, over 3 years.
Yeah, it was probably 5 years. I mean, I was there a long time, but it was 5 years of me.
Talking to Jeff Hawkins, both of us off and on. And that became fluid. And then what I absolutely remember is over, and I do think of this a lot as we're considering or reflecting on our 5 years, even as a board and strategically, we were 100% all in for a year, and certainly the year of publishing, right? Yeah. So published September, but that entire calendar year, and I'd say really starting January 1, we felt we're going to do this. And and then we hired folks starting May of that year.
Yeah. Jason Israel, our CTO, and I were employed
I
number
remember
1
the
and
phone
2,
call.
May 1st.
I was in an Exxon filling my car up, and you said, I think we have to do this. And it was our first non-budgeted item, I might add.
Was it?
Yeah. I mean, we budgeted, but way early than we thought.
Oh, that we hired Jason because we started work in May. We just thought
we got to start earlier. And so the burn started. But anyway, so it is incredibly difficult to believe it's been 5 years.
Yeah.
And, I'm looking forward to the next 5. And at that point, I think a heart attack is probably in the cards.
Probably. I think so. That's kind of what I'm moving towards. Because I'll be 60. So between turning 60 and 10 years at Daily Memphian, I'll be due. I remember it starting, the story I tell people, like the shorthand story was, you and I
just want to point out I won't be 60 in that time frame.
No, you
keep
won't.
going. Sorry.
You'll be like 58.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Oh.
We'll be way younger.
Way younger. Late 50s. Is you and I have been talking, I was at Daily News. We were friends going back to when we were neighbors, and you would always kind of grill me on news, and what's going on locally and what we were doing and what was going on with the CA. And I always thought it was just, I didn't know that you had this really genuine love and respect for news and the importance, especially of local news. And that took a little while for me to realize it wasn't just stuff we were talking about as friends. And then I remember when Gannett, and this does not need to be the beat up on the CA podcast, but when Gannett announced it was buying the Media General Group and including the CA, I remember you called me and you said, well, it's going to get better now, right? And I said, I think it's going to get worse. And you go, there's no way. And I said, just everyone, Gannett has been cutting and cutting and cutting. And they'd said they wouldn't cut for 366 days. And I think it was the spring of 2016, they cut a third of the staff. And I remember where I was when I heard that, because I was in Cafe Kio downtown. I think Kyle Veazey, who had left, I think I saw him. He came through there. He might have been at the city then. And I was like, this is a bad day. And he goes, it's a really bad day.
Yeah.
And they went from 60 to 40 that day. And that you called or texted me or something and said, hey, let's have lunch. And I think we went to Cafe Kio. And then I realized, Andy's really serious about this. Serious about news and the importance of news and the civic threat that this represents, in a way that it was, even though I knew you'd put the group together to try and buy the CA, I didn't get it till that moment.
Yeah, but I think that's why I say it was fluid, because I don't know if I could claim I got it. I definitely on the passion for it and
that's what I'm saying. Yeah, it's not like you walked in and said, this is what we're going to do.
The awareness of how critical it is. And by the way, I do get a kick out of this, and Natalie's going to pull up our first interview. We also did the dance around. Well, we're not trying to hammer the CA. This is about Gannett. I know. I will do that disclaimer now that the people locally,
which is true.
And I think in a lot of ways, frankly, we have helped the CA, because by being here, I think corporately Gannett has made the CA a specific institution that they're watching because of an existential threat.
Yeah.
But, and that's good for Memphis. But I think having been fortunate to work on projects, or so did you, around town, and then always seeing and always feeling that you have to have a healthy local newspaper in any community for 50 different reasons, not just as the easy one is to always say as a watchdog and to hold politicians accountable, which, by the way, is critical. And I can name tons of examples when the CA was on its game and those things were beyond critical. Yeah. And then also I had worked around the Grizzly stuff, and I remember Jeff Calkins in particular. Yeah. And Jeff's voice, I really believe this. I don't think there'd be a Grizzlies here if Jeff had not have been a thoughtful, extraordinarily intelligent voice that was measured and people trusted, that was also endorsing it. And effectively he might not use the term endorsement, and he questioned a ton of it. But at the end of the day, he was a supporter of the Grizzlies being here. Yeah. And back now, people think, well, that's a no-brainer. Well, it wasn't. You remember it well. It wasn't a no-brainer, and it was divisive, and there were a lot of difficult conversations. And Jeff was in the middle of all that, but the CA was in the middle of that. Yeah. The Fourth Estate was in the middle of that. And then the other part, I've just always felt, it's engagement. It's civic engagement. And of course, everybody's not going to agree. And of course, people are going to say whoever the paper of record is, who I frankly think it's us now, and that creates a burden, but one that we asked for. But ultimately, you have to have that community forum, and I think for a healthy community, and I've always felt strongly about that, and including other cities I've lived in, that you've lived in, that if you don't have that, it's difficult to have a guidepost.
Yeah. We're here talking to Andy Cates, the board chair of Memphis Fourth Estate, which is the 501c3 that owns and operates and oversees the Daily Memphian, and my friend and one of the co-founders of Daily Memphian. As we move towards our 5th anniversary, will be September 17th, and we'll talk a little bit more about the origin of this thing. We're going to do this in 2 parts, by the way. So we'll talk for 25, 30 minutes today, and then we'll talk again. We'll record for next week.
Wait, I'm sorry to interrupt. Yes. I thought this was a 10-part series.
It's the 10-part series. The documentary team that's
going to have 3 listeners.
We should try to convince people that there's literally a team of videographers filming us, recording this right now.
Hey kids, it's Dad. I'm going to text you after this is over.
That's great.
This is delayed.
This is delayed. But let me do some housekeeping real quick. Remind everyone, I'm Eric Barnes. This is The Sidebar. It airs on WYXR 91.7 every Thursday at 11:30, focused on the community, arts, culture, everything in between. It's also one of many weekly podcasts we do at the Daily Memphian, including the Behind the Headlines podcast, Bill Drees and Sam Hardiman's Politics podcast, On the Records. That's funny. I like that. Leave that in, please, for the love of God. On the Record, the Memphis Grizzlies podcast, the food podcast Sound Bites, hosted now by Chris Harrington, as we still reel from the loss of Jennifer Biggs recently. All those shows are on iTunes, Spotify, the Daily Memphian site, wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get all the WYXR shows at wyxr.org or on the WYXR app. That includes the talk shows, that includes the music shows, archives of all the music shows. I should also say, consider becoming a member of WYXR. It's nonprofit, listener-supported radio. We should tell that story, by the way.
That's a great
maybe
story.
We'll do that next week. Let's talk about, because that is a great story about how, it's a funny thing as I sit here and read this and forget that insane way that YXR happened. So we should come back to that. I should also say, become a subscriber to the Daily Memphian. If you're already a subscriber, you can become a supporter. We are a nonprofit 501c3 newsroom. You can learn more about all that at dailymemphian.com. As part of the 5-year anniversary, we had Dan Conaway on last week. He's not just a columnist for us at the Daily Memphian. He also did a lot of the original branding, which involved him yelling at me and Andy for just hours.
While we agreed.
Yeah. While we agreed. I told him that story. And he actually, if you listen to that podcast, he actually brings up the dynamic of, he goes, well, a lot of times people say they like the work I do, but they like it for the wrong reason. I go, well, Dan, that brings up the story of when the 3 of us are in a room yelling at each other. And finally, I think you, Andy, raised your voice even higher and was like, Dan, we agree with you. We agree. And he looked at you and goes, but you're agreeing for the wrong reason. And he just kept going at it. He'd still be yelling at us. But it was fun to talk to Dan and remember some of that stuff and the whole launch. We recently talked, it's probably 6 weeks ago, Jeff Calkins came on. We talked some about the launch. We talked a lot about Jennifer Biggs. So if you can bear it, it's a good listen. And Otis Sanford was on about 2 months ago talking about just, again, local news and the whole kind of evolution of things from over the many decades he's been in local news. In the next couple of weeks, we've got Mary Casciola, Holly Whitfield, and Jane Donahoe, 3 of the key editors and leaders at Daily Memphian, coming on talking about their perspective on where we were and where we are. We also have, I mentioned Jason Israel, our first employee, our chief technology officer, and Kate Crawford, our longtime product development guru. They're going to come on by Zoom, which is hysterical because they're never in the office. So we're going to do a Zoom with them, talk about just the back end of the site and all the things. It'll be a really wonky conversation that I will enjoy greatly. I can't believe they agreed to come on and do this. Mostly they had to. I mentioned Behind the Headlines that we do over on WKNO. We've been doing profiles of all the major mayoral candidates. We've done Michelle McKissick, J.W. Gibson, Van Turner, Karen Camper, and Paul Young. And coming up soon, we've got Floyd Bonner and then Willie Harrington. All those, if you missed any of them, are at WKNO.org, or you can go to dailymemphian.com. You can also, if you missed it, recent mayoral debate that we did with WKNO, that's on the Daily Memphian site. You can search for it on YouTube. You can go to WKNO.org. So much housekeeping.
Can I just say one thing? Did you choose to do that basic preview or review of all of our shows during my podcast because you didn't feel like there'd be enough interesting content?
Yes.
Because I felt like when you're in Sirius and you're in a rental car and you go, like, Sirius is telling you what are all the Sirius channels.
Yeah.
That's what I felt like.
Yeah.
Thank you for the time today. This was great.
This was
and
great.
Congratulations
Really
on 5 years, everybody.
Really good job.
Okay.
Good job.
Thank you.
Well done. The other stuff on the Origin it was crazy that summer we talked about May 1st and I was hired and officially and even though you and I have been working on it for it was at least a year. I was the summer before.
Yep.
It was just nonstop. And then Jason, and then over the course of that summer, the crazy thing is that we looked at it like, we're going to have to start hiring all these reporters now, even though we're not going to launch until originally August, and we pushed it back to September, which is still crazy, by the way, that we launched that quickly. It was actually, I tell people
building
in the industry,
a plane in the air.
it was absolutely crazy. So we hired people all summer. And then we did that launch event, and I meant to look up when, but we did because the word was getting out.
The
Jeff
launch,
had
I think, was November, wasn't
it? It was
October, November.
No. Oh, I meant the thing that we did actually at the FedEx Forum.
Oh, I thought you were
the
talking
press
about
conference.
I'm sorry,
yeah.
I thought you were talking about Overton
Square. We did a party in Overton Square, right?
Yeah.
About
the
one
launch
month
thing
after
at
launch.
FedEx Forum. Yeah.
The launch thing at FedEx Forum was probably July, because Chris had quit, Jennifer Biggs had quit. Just the word was getting out. That something was going on. We did that. And then we got to August and we had like 25 people hired. And I was like, yeah, you can't do any work. And they're like, this is the craziest thing. I go, I know, but we're not ready to launch and we're not going to ease into it. Like, we're going to have a day, and we didn't tell anyone. That's another thing I've forgotten. I mean, internally we knew we had a target date. We missed our original date. And then we said, all right, September 17th, we're doing it. But we just turned it on, which was actually a really weird, but was the right thing. Because we were like, if we need another day, we don't want to step all over ourselves. So we never told people. We always said the fall. I think that's
we always said fall.
And then we did turn it on, and then people started subscribing and started reading.
I think the buses, including the buses that had your picture, like the massive picture.
I still have one of those buses.
And I still remember being on the phone in my office in the Pinch and at my windows on Main Street. And we're talking about something that a bus comes by with your, I think it was a 50-foot by 84-foot portrait. And it was coming in fall, Daily Memphian. I'm like, okay,
it's
on.
Come home.
It's happening. Yeah.
Dan,
right. Back to Dan.
No, but yeah.
Dan did a fantastic, unbelievable job. And if he was here, he'd be yelling and saying that's still not the right way to characterize the incredible job I did naming this thing and doing a killer logo, which he did.
He did. He's still got all the alternate names. I told him he's got to keep those and show them to us.
Well, we also could go into the Bob Loeb Memphian story.
He did. Dan did, but go ahead.
So if Bob's one of the listeners, thank you, Bob, because we did talk about making it just the Memphian.
Yeah.
And then a certain hotel in Midtown had the name and graciously rejected changing to the Overton, which was what Dan, by the way, wanted it to be, the Overton. So anybody considering staying in the Memphian hotel, it's actually called the Overton.
Yeah, if you know Dan Conway, it is. Yeah. Actually, the Daily Memphian thing, though, is a thing that was good that we added. I'm glad we did. And it's fun. I always talk about that. I agree with that.
It's a daily tenor.
It's a day. Yeah. It's like evoking the new, the old news, paper, the look of it. I talked to Dan about the whole sans serif font thing, and like just a bunch of simple choices. Again, we did lots that we screwed up, but those were things we did really well. And it was weird. I mean, again, we're doing the congratulatory.
You mean screwed up, like not having weekend staff?
Like not having weekend or night staff. Like, God, what else did we screw up? We underpriced it.
Who knew that a paper of record would need to have weekend news?
I always tell people.
Why would you ever assume anyone would care to read the paper on the weekend? But you and I talked ourselves
into this idea that we could just we'll just grow into that. But the expectation was so much greater immediately of what we would be. It was like, oh no, we have to be everything people want, or more of what people want right away. We don't have time to grow.
The joy of reflecting and of historical context and of those who make history and putting this on the record that Natalie's recording is, I remember you calling and saying, I do not want to have weekend at all. And I said, no, we're going to need weekend. And you said, no way. And then later, I remember having to call you and correcting it and saying, I told you so. And you said, you're right. Because you do that a lot too. A lot of times we work together almost daily. often, multi-times a day, you often will say, yes, I agree, Andy. Thank you for that. And thanks for that. That was incredibly insightful.
I say
that was an incredibly insightful and helpful and constructive idea, Andy, and I'm going to get right on it.
Every one of those words I have said to you.
Say you're right on right now. Just say you're right.
I was trying to find a way to do it. I was like, you're right.
You physically, I wish this was on video because physically the discomfort was so clear.
I can do it. It's really warm in here.
Do you want to give a preview of any other podcast for another break in our interview?
I do. We're going to do a little housekeeping at the end. So just, you're going to have to talk fast. What else from that? Then we launch. And the other one that's crazy, so I was putting some stuff together, and we tell people this, but it is weird to think about. Our first year goal for paid subs, which was admittedly this very low number because we were trying to be very cautious, very conservative, was something like 3,500.
Yeah, but don't forget, we also asked, and I remember going around the room, and I won't go by team member, but almost all of whom are still here. And I remember going through kind of a prep session and had everybody, I wrote it. I've got to go. I should have brought my notes. And it was unbelievable, the answers. And you know, this will shock you guys since y'all don't live in the journalism world day to day, hour to hour.
Yeah.
Journalists can be a little crusty, be sometimes more glass half empty. And so some of those answers that just terrified me were like 200.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, 3. And I'm like, ha, 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 you know, like, no, really, this will be they didn't say this, but you could just see it in their eyes. Like, this is going to be a disaster and you're a naive fool. But they were wrong, thankfully. So, and happily wrong.
And because we hit 3,500 in like 3 weeks.
Yeah. And then
which was crazy. And we were 7,500 by the end of the year.
Well, the other thing we did that if we go back to the literally 50 pro formas, I mean, obviously modifications of
financial budgets, projections.
Of the different projections I did think about this recently, is the total numbers of folks. We never projected we'd have this many in this big of a newsroom ever. We really didn't. But to be fair, there were so many, and kidding aside on the weekends, I still remember also us talking about, and this I remember it was Jeff Calkins who felt strongly we didn't have a and you were the first to say, oh yeah, that's just a miss. We needed a Tiger basketball full time.
Right, we had 8 Tigers.
And of course you're going to have a full time Tiger basketball, like right. But we didn't have that planned.
No, and we didn't have enough arts and culture. We didn't have, there was just all this stuff that we sort of said, look, we want to get there. We want to get there. But it became very clear because it was like, I always tell people like it was amazing, if I'm talking to people in the industry, I'm like, we hit 3,500 in 3 weeks and 7,500 by the end of the year. And that was awesome. No complaints. But it also, what came with that was these expectations that were like, oh, you guys are going to be, I think we launched with 25 people in the newsroom, which wasn't near enough.
Yeah.
Then we went to 30 as quickly as we could. And then just go, oh, we're still not getting to things that there is an expectation we have to get to those things. And they weren't, I mean, like people will come up to me and say, I really wish you have a gardening section. I'm very nice. We're never going to have a gardening section. But these were things like from Tigers basketball to more metro reporting to more business reporting. I mean, really bread and butter stuff that we were like, well, if we can afford it down the road, we'll keep adding people. But it was like, no, you got to do it right now.
And I do still remember you always to this day, and you were initially always hated arts. And you were always like, I don't want arts coverage.
That's another lie.
And I was like, we're going to need better arts coverage. And you were like, arts don't matter. I think that was.
It's pretty much. I have a tattoo, actually.
It was either, you know what? It may not have been that forceful. It may have been more passive aggressive. It may have been like arts is so yesterday. I think that was the actual.
That was probably what it was. Yeah. That was probably what it was.
But that is, kidding aside, that was the other, to me, the greatest challenge of this and the most intimidating part, and all kidding aside on arts as an example, and on weekends and on Tiger basketball, right? That the recognition and realization that the amount of talent and capacity you have to add to do it right, there's no way you can know it until you're really in it. And then obviously, we obviously, part of our business plan was how are we going to deal with a plague? So we're going to have
exactly.
You're going to have a
that whole editorial plan
worldwide shutdown. And I remember that was plan 24-3 that we're going to have. But I mean, truly, and that had to be its own. What are we going to do here? Like every other business in the world, to figure out.
Right.
What has been your biggest? I'm going to turn the tide on you, and I'd like to ask 10 questions that I brought with me.
Well, this is why it's a two-parter.
What was the? I'd ask you the same question of in your brain, this is going to happen. Like, okay, no matter how we got there in the various conversations, your own thoughts, your own previous thoughts on daily news and modifying that business plan years before. When did you realize this is on and this is going to happen?
I mean, the dynamic for me was that, it was sad to see the CA cutting, and it was this thing where the old daily news and the weekly edition we had, and that morning, I think it was morning email edition we did, or maybe it was afternoon. It had a nice niche following, right? And we were able to have newsroom of 7 people maybe, and a bunch of freelancers. And it was like we were getting bigger as the CA got smaller. And people started saying to me, they'd like stop me and go, "Hey, are you guys going to take over for the CA?" I was like, "No, like you don't understand how daunting that is." But it was meant as a compliment. It's
talking
like,
about
great.
daily news.
Daily news. Yeah. So that little niche business, politics, and whatever else we wanted to do thing. That's where I started to realize there was this really growing like panic among people, like literally panic about what's going to happen. And anger about it, at the ownership, not at the people in Memphis, but at the ownership. In terms of Daily Memphian, when did I think it was really going to happen? I mean, there was the lunch I remember, I think at Cafe Kio, where like, well, we got to do something. CA's just cut.
Cafe Kio an advertiser, by the way, because we've shouted them out at least 3 times.
Kevin is not an advertiser.
Well, that's
note
to self.
I interviewed Kevin. He did the entire interview wearing sunglasses.
That's
Kevin.
fantastic.
It was fantastic.
Yeah,
it was the most editing, and Natalie Van Gundy, producer of the show, most editing ever done. He swore constantly. He's like, "Oh, I can't swear," because it goes on radio. It's because of radio we can't swear, right? Yeah. So that kind of, I was like, "Oh shoot, this is real." And then,
Dad gummit, this is real.
Golly
darn
gee,
nabbit,
Andy, that sounds real bad.
Gee whiz,
that's exactly how we always talk. But it wasn't, we started working and doing the budgets and the projections and talking about models and doing research of we're going nonprofit, for profit, like what's out there that we could pick and choose from. It wasn't until probably the spring of 18 that I was like, this is really going to happen. Because we didn't know it was really going to happen until maybe it was January, February or something like that we would have the funding to do it. And even then it was like, well, how big can we be? I remember we did models that had 15 people.
Yeah.
We were just going to do sort of metro, city, county, political stuff and a little bit of business and a little sport. We were going to be niche, like big niche kind of publication. It really wasn't until that summer, I think, that late spring, that it was like, I remember this is a terrible analogy, but we used to always say we have to drop a bomb on it. We have to get as big as we can, which at the time we thought was 25 was like, oh my God, this is so big. And we're now 40 for instance. So people understand, plus, 15, 20 freelancers at any given time. So all of it was blurry until, and even I think, honestly, until we said, all right, you're hired. We're actually hiring people. Maybe it was when it really, really became real, because it still was not like, we still might have said, no, we're just going to do a super niche kind of thing. We're going to do a big, just focus on a few topics.
You say that, but we really didn't. I don't feel like we ever were serious about the super niche at any point. Yeah. I really don't. Okay. I don't, because I think you were already doing that at Daily News in a good way. I mean that I was a major follower, reader, but the biggest, so go back to this. I'm being told, I'm feeling pressured by time right now because Natalie and Eric are going back and forth on time.
Well, yeah, we're gonna do a cliffhanger.
I'm not
we're
done
come
with
back
my
next.
I'm not done with my questions.
Well, next you can do the whole thing,
my
including
question,
all the housekeeping you can do on the next one. Join us next week. WYXR 91.7 Thursday at 11:30, or just go to your podcast feed and you'll get the next one where we continue the conversation and Andy gets to ask me questions. But that's all the time we have this week. If you missed any of it, go to wherever you get your podcast, Daily Memphian, go to WYXR. And again, next week we'll be talking to Andy and he'll get to talk more. Thanks.